The sun was already high when the convoy slowed near the edge of the town. Dust hung in the air like a thin curtain, catching the light and softening the sharp lines of broken buildings. Soldiers moved with quiet focus, eyes scanning rooftops, windows, and alleys. Among them walked an intelligence officer. He carried no special gear that stood out. His uniform was plain, his movements calm. To anyone watching from far away, he looked like a man who belonged behind maps and radios, not out in the open. He had joined the unit only days earlier. His job, on paper, was simple. He gathered information, listened, asked questions, and passed along what he learned. He spoke little and never raised his voice. When others joked or complained, he listened with a faint smile, then returned to his notes. Most of the soldiers saw him as smart but harmless. Useful? Yes. Dangerous? No. From the hills beyond the town, enemy eyes followed the convoy. They had been watching for hours, learning patterns, counting steps, judging posture. They noticed the way the soldiers moved in pairs, how they stopped before corners, how their heads tilted when a sound carried on the wind. They also noticed the intelligence officer. He did not carry himself like the rest. No heavy weapon, no loud confidence, just steady steps and quiet awareness to the enemy snipers. He looked like the weakest piece on the board. They marked him early, not as the first target, but as an easy one. Someone whose loss would cause confusion. Someone who would shake morale. Someone who would be missed, but not feared. They assumed he would panic if shots rang out. They believed he would freeze or run. That belief settled in their minds, firm and comfortable. Inside the town, the convoy paused near a narrow street. The air felt still, the kind of stillness that made soldiers uneasy. The intelligence officer stopped with the rest. He did not rush. He did not fidget. He took a slow look around, eyes moving from shadow to shadow. He noticed small things. A piece of cloth caught on a wire. Fresh marks on a wall. The way birds avoided one rooftop but gathered on another. He said nothing. The unit leader spoke into the radio, asking for an update. The intelligence officer stood a step back, listening. His head tilted slightly, as if he were trying to hear something beyond normal sound. A few soldiers glanced at him, then away. To them, he was just doing his job, thinking about reports and enemy numbers. The enemy snipers adjusted their positions. Wind speed was checked. Angles were confirmed. One of them watched the intelligence officer through a scope and felt a small thrill. This would be clean, quick. A lesson delivered from a distance. The officer shifted his weight just a little. He moved half a step to the side, as if to get a better view of the street ahead. It looked casual, natural, nothing that would raise alarm. But from far away. That small movement broke a clean line of sight. The sniper frowned. The officer looked down the street again. He noticed how the light hit one window too evenly, as if something blocked the wind inside. He noticed the silence of the rooftop above it. He noticed the shape of the street and how sound would travel there still. He said nothing. The convoy began to move again. Boots scraped lightly against gravel. A vehicle engine hummed low. The intelligence officer walked near the center, not protected, not exposed. Just another body in a line of bodies. From the hills, the snipers waited. They had patience. They had time. They told themselves the man was nothing special. Just a thinker. Just paper and plans. The officer reached a point where the street narrowed. He slowed. His eyes flicked upward, then to the left, then behind. His breathing stayed steady. His hands were relaxed at his sides. To anyone nearby, he looked calm, almost bored. A soldier beside him whispered a question, asking if anything felt off. The officer answered quietly, choosing his words with care. He said the area felt watched. He suggested spacing out a little more. No panic, no orders. Just a suggestion. The unit adjusted without thinking much about it. From far away, the snipers noticed the spacing change. It was subtle, but it mattered. Their timing calculations shifted. Their clean shot became less clean. One sniper muttered that it did not matter. The intelligence officer was still there, still walking. Still exposed, the officer paused near a low wall. He rested one hand on it, as if tired. His gaze dropped to the ground. Anyone watching up close would think he was taking a short break, but his ears were working hard. His eyes even pointed down, tracked reflections and shadows. His mind ran through old habits he never spoke about. Habits built long before intelligence briefings in quiet rooms. The enemy snipers felt ready. Below, the officer lifted his head again. He looked down the street one last time. His face showed no fear, no tension, just focus. In that moment, the enemy believed they were in control. They believed they had chosen the time and place. They believed they were about to remove a small piece from the field. They did not yet understand that they had already been seen, not as shapes or bodies, but as intent. And they did not know that the quiet intelligence officer was already adjusting to them. The way a teacher watches students make the same mistake he has seen many times before, the town remained silent. The convoy moved forward, and the trap, as everyone thought it was, waited to be sprung. The first shot did not sound like a crack. It sounded flat, almost dull, as if the air itself had been punched. For a split second, no one reacted. Then the echo rolled through the street, bouncing off stone and metal. Everything changed. A round struck the wall just above where the intelligence officer had been standing moments before. Dust burst outward. Small chips of stone sprayed into the air. Soldiers dropped low on instinct, weapons coming up, voices calling out warnings. The calm walk turned into sharp movement. The intelligence officer was already moving. He did not run forward or backward. He moved sideways, slipping behind cover that had already been measured in his mind. His body stayed low, but not rushed. His breathing stayed controlled. He reached the ground behind a broken concrete barrier and stayed still for half a second. Listening, another shot followed. This one hit farther down the street. The sound told a story. Distance, angle, elevation. Somewhere above, enemy snipers watched through their scopes. The first shot had missed its true goal. The second was meant to correct it. They expected panic now, shouting, chaos. They did not get it. The intelligence officer lifted his head just enough to see reflections in nearby windows. He did not look for the shooter. He looked for signs of movement caused by the shooter. A faint shift of shadow, a flicker of light, a shape that did not belong. He spoke into the radio, voice low and steady. He did not say the word sniper. He described what he heard and where the sound came from. He told the unit to stay down and avoid the open center of the street. His words were simple, clear, no wasted breath. A soldier near him asked where to look. The officer answered without hesitation, pointing with 2 fingers instead of raising his head. He named a rooftop and a window line. He said where not to look as well. That mattered just as much. Another shot rang out. It struck a parked vehicle, sending a sharp ring through the air. Metal bent. Glass shattered. The sound echoed louder than before. The enemy snipers felt tension rise. Their target was not reacting like an untrained man. He was not frozen. He was not exposed. He was not loud. One sniper adjusted his position, crawling inches at a time. The movement was careful, practiced. He believed he was unseen. Below, the intelligence officer noticed a new sound. A faint scrape against concrete, carried by the still air. His eyes narrowed. He shifted his body slightly, pressing closer to cover. He did not alert the entire unit yet. He wanted confirmation. A soldier nearby was breathing fast. Fear showed in his eyes. The officer reached out and pressed a hand briefly against the soldier's shoulder. The touch was firm, grounding. He told him to slow his breathing and stay low. The soldier nodded, calmer now. More shots came, spaced apart. Each one tested reactions. Each one searched for a mistake. The intelligence officer tracked them all. He counted seconds between shots. He listened to how the sound changed. He noticed which echoes arrived first. His mind worked quietly, building a picture piece by piece. He spoke again on the radio. This time he asked for smoke on a specific section of the street. not to hide movement, but to shape it. He asked another team to shift positions, not toward the threat, but away from where the enemy wanted them to look. The unit followed his guidance without question now. His calm had spread. Panic faded into focus. From the hills, one sniper muttered that something was wrong. The man below was directing movement too well. He was predicting reactions before they happened. The second sniper dismissed the concern. He believed patience would win. He lined up another shot, aiming at a figure that shifted behind cover. The intelligence officer sensed the aim before the shot came. He felt the weight of attention settle on his position. It was not fear. It was awareness. He leaned out just enough to show a shoulder, just enough to invite a response. The shot came instantly. Concrete exploded inches from where his shoulder had been. He was already moving, rolling to the side, using the sound to confirm what his mind had suspected. The angle was higher now. The shooter had changed elevation. He pressed his back to the wall and closed his eyes for a brief moment. In that silence, old training surfaced without effort. Lessons given. Lessons repeated. Mistakes corrected again and again. He opened his eyes and smiled. Faintly, he passed new instructions through the radio. Short, exact. He told one team to hold still no matter what. He told another to create noise in a place that did not matter. Footsteps. Loose debris. Controlled distraction. The enemy snipers took the bait. One of them shifted to get a better view of the noise. It was a small adjustment, but it broke concealment just enough. A reflection flashed for a fraction of a second. The intelligence officer saw it. He did not fire. He did not point. He simply marked it in his mind and adjusted his plan. The street filled with tension, but not confusion. Soldiers moved when told and stayed still when told. Trust had formed, fast and quiet. Another shot rang out, closer now. Too close. The officer leaned toward the radio and spoke one sentence that made nearby. Soldiers glanced at him with new understanding. He told them the enemy was rushing because they felt exposed. From above, the snipers felt it too. The hunt no longer felt clean. The man they thought was weak was shaping the fight. They still believed they could finish it. They were wrong below. The intelligence officer settled deeper into cover, eyes steady, mind clear. He was no longer reacting. He was preparing to turn the engagement around. The street felt smaller now, not because walls had moved, but because attention had narrowed. Every sound seemed louder. Every pause felt longer. Soldiers stayed low, eyes searching, waiting for the next command. They no longer questioned where the guidance came from. They simply followed it. The intelligence officer stayed pressed against the wall, still and patient. He was not in a hurry. He let the silence stretch, knowing silence often made people act before they should. His eyes stayed half-lidded, watching reflections, tracking shadows. Reading the air above them, one of the enemy snipers felt his pulse rise. He had fired enough shots to know when something was wrong. The target below was not reacting like a cornered man. He was shaping the space, slowing the fight, forcing choices. The officer raised 2 fingers and pointed briefly. A nearby soldier shifted just a few inches, moving out of a narrow line. Seconds later, a round struck where the soldier's head had been. The sound was sharp and close. The soldier froze. Eyes wide, the officer leaned toward him and spoke quietly, almost gently. He told him to stay exactly where he was and trust the wall. The soldier swallowed and nodded. Over the radio, the officer asked a simple question. He wanted confirmation of wind direction at a higher elevation. A pause followed. Then an answer came back, unsure but useful. The officer adjusted his thinking. He pressed his palm flat against the ground and felt the faint vibration of distant movement. It was subtle but real. Someone above was repositioning again. The enemy was getting nervous. He sent another message through the radio. He asked one team to toss a small object down the street. Nothing explosive, just enough to make sound and draw attention. He timed it carefully. The object clattered across stone. A shot came immediately, Snapping toward the noise, the officer nodded to himself. That confirmed it. He shifted his weight and leaned just enough to see a sliver of rooftop through a broken sign. The angle was tight. The view was poor. But it was enough. He spoke again, this time more directly. He told the unit leader where the shooter was likely positioned. Not with exact words, but with reference points anyone could understand. The corner of a roof. The line of rust. The shadow that didn't move with the wind. The unit leader hesitated for half a second, then trusted him. From that moment, the fight changed. The officer began giving guidance that felt different. Not rushed. Not loud. But deliberate. He asked for patience. He told soldiers when not to move. He warned them against chasing the sound of shots. He spoke like someone who had seen this situation many times before. A soldier whispered to another, asking how the intelligence officer knew all this. The other shrugged. There was no time for questions. Above them, the enemy sniper realized something that made his mouth go dry. The man below was predicting him. Every time he adjusted, the response came faster. Every attempt to draw movement failed. The sniper tried one last trick. He exposed himself just enough to look careless, hoping to pull attention. The officer did not take the bait. Instead, he watched the space behind the exposed spot. He knew the move. He had taught it once, correcting a student who thought the same trick was clever. A second enemy shooter revealed himself without knowing it. Just a flicker. Just a shape. That was enough. The officer closed his eyes briefly, locking the picture into memory. When he opened them, his voice over the radio was calm but firm. He told one team to shift pressure in a way that felt wrong to them. Made sense to him. They did it. The enemy shooters felt the balance slip. The angles they relied on disappeared. Safe spaces became risky. Their sense of control faded. One sniper whispered that the man below was trained differently. Not just experienced, instructive. The realization hit hard. This was not someone who had learned from chaos. This was someone who had learned by correcting others. Someone who saw mistakes before they fully formed. The officer adjusted again, using the environment instead of force. He let the enemy think they had an opening, then quietly removed it. He allowed one line of sight to stay open while closing others. Guiding attention where he wanted it, the street stayed quiet. But tension climbed. A soldier near the officer finally asked the question that had been sitting in his mind. He asked where the officer had learned to read fights like this. The officer did not answer right away. He waited for another distant scrape, another faint shift. When it came, he spoke softly, almost distracted. He said he had spent time teaching people how to survive situations. Just like this. That was all. The words settled heavily. The soldier looked at him differently now. Above them, the enemy snipers no longer thought about finishing the job. They thought about escape. They thought about how to leave without exposing themselves further. The officer sensed the change. Fear had a pattern too. He leaned into the radio one more time and gave instructions that showed no anger, no rush. Just certainty. He described what the enemy would likely do next and how to be ready for it, as if on cue. Movement started where he said it would. The soldiers reacted smoothly. Already in position, the enemy shooters realized too late that they were no longer facing chance or confusion. They were facing someone who understood their thinking better than they did. The intelligence officer stayed where he was, steady and focused. He did not celebrate. He did not rush. He was doing what he had always done. He was teaching the fight how to end. The shift was quiet, but everyone felt it. What had begun as an ambush now felt like something else. The enemy was no longer pushing the pace. They were hesitating. That hesitation traveled through the air like a signal. The intelligence officer stayed still, letting it grow. He knew this moment well. It was the point when confidence cracked, but had not yet broken. When people made small mistakes because they wanted relief more than control. He spoke into the radio again, voice steady. He told one group to stay exactly where they were, even though every instinct told them to move. He told another group to shift slowly, not to chase. but to close space the enemy believed was still open. The soldiers followed him without question now. They had seen enough. His calm had proven itself. Above them, one of the enemy snipers pulled back from his position inch by inch. He did it carefully, trying to keep his outline hidden. He believed he was slipping away unseen. The officer noticed the change in sound almost immediately. The echo of movement was different now, softer, uneven. He adjusted his plan. He asked for smoke again. But this time, not where the enemy expected it. The smoke rolled into an area that had seemed useless moments earlier. It did not block vision so much as it shaped attention. The enemy snipers reacted just as he thought they would. One shifted to maintain sight on what he believed mattered. In doing so, he exposed a piece of himself he should not have. The officer saw it. He did not rush the response. He waited, counting breaths, letting the enemy settle into his mistake. A soldier near him whispered, asking if this was the moment. The officer nodded once. He gave instructions that were short and precise. He told one team to apply pressure from a direction the enemy believed was impossible. He told another to hold fire. Even when it felt wrong, time stretched, then movement happened exactly where he had predicted. The enemy sniper tried to break contact, shifting fast now, no longer controlled. The calm had left him. The soldiers reacted smoothly, cutting off angles and denying escape. There was no rush, no shouting, just steady action guided by preparation. From the hills, the second enemy shooter realized what was happening. He was no longer part of an attack. He was part of a problem being solved. He tried to communicate, but hesitation had already done its damage. The timing was gone. The space was gone. The officer felt the moment close. He adjusted one last detail, asking a team to create a sound that would draw attention away from the true movement. It worked. The enemy's focus shifted. That was enough. When the engagement ended, it did so without chaos. The shots stopped. The pressure faded. The silence returned, heavier than before. The soldiers stayed low, waiting for confirmation. They did not celebrate. They watched and listened, just as they had been taught over the last hour without realizing it. The officer remained against the wall, eyes still scanning. He did not relax until he was certain the threat had passed. Only then did he stand. Dust clung to his uniform. His face showed fatigue, but not relief. This had not been luck. It had been method. The unit leader approached him slowly, respect clear in his posture. He asked a question he already knew the answer to. He asked where the officer had learned to handle a situation like that. The officer gave a small shrug. He said he had spent years showing others how to read terrain, how to stay calm, how to survive long enough to think. No rank was mentioned. No title, but everyone listening understood. The soldiers looked at him differently now. Not with fear, with trust. As the unit regrouped, they checked each other for injuries and damage. Quiet words passed between them. The energy had changed. Confidence had replaced tension. The officer returned to his original place near the center of the group. He did not take command. He did not step forward. He simply went back to observing. From that day on, no one dismissed him as just an intelligence officer. They noticed how he walked, how he paused before corners, how he listened more than he spoke. They understood that some experience does not announce itself, as the convoy prepared to move again. One soldier asked him if he ever missed teaching. The officer considered the question. He looked down the street one last time, then answered quietly. He said teaching never really stopped. It only changed shape. The vehicles rolled forward. Behind them, the town returned to stillness. What the enemy had planned as a clean attack had ended as a lesson they would not forget. Delivered without anger or pride, and the man they had marked as weak walked on, unnoticed by the world. Carrying knowledge that had once again kept others alive, the convoy moved out of the town as the light began to soften. Dust trailed behind the vehicles, rising slowly before settling back onto the road. No one spoke much. The kind of quiet that followed was not empty. It was full of thought. The intelligence officer sat where he always had, between others, not set apart. He checked his notes, adjusted a strap, and looked out at the passing ground. To anyone watching, he looked like a man returning to routine after a long day. But around him, things had changed. Soldiers who had barely noticed him before now watched the way he listened to the radio. They noticed how he scanned the horizon without rushing, how he paused before speaking, then chose words that mattered. No one asked him to explain what had happened. They already knew enough. Later, when the vehicles stopped for a brief rest, a few soldiers gathered nearby. Someone offered water. Someone else cracked a quiet joke to break the weight in the air. The officers smiled and accepted the bottle, thanking them like it was nothing. One soldier finally spoke up. He said that earlier, when the shots started, he had been sure they would not make it out clean. He admitted fear without shame. He said that hearing the officer's calm voice had steadied him. The officer listened, without interrupting. When the soldier finished, the officer nodded. He said fear was normal. He said fear kept people honest. What mattered was learning how to move through it without letting it take control. The words stayed with them as night settled. Radios crackled with updates. The mission continued, just like it always did. Maps were checked. Routes were confirmed. Tomorrow would bring new problems. The officer returned to his role fully. He gathered information, asked quiet questions, and shared what he learned. He did not mention the earlier fight. He did not frame it as a lesson, but lessons lingered anyway. A younger soldier approached him later, hesitant. He asked how someone learned to stay so calm under pressure. He expected a complicated answer. The officer surprised him. He said calm came from preparation and repetition. From making mistakes in training so fewer were made when it counted. He said calm was not the absence of fear, but the ability to think alongside it. The soldier thanked him and walked away, thoughtful. That night, as most slept, the officer stayed awake a little longer. He reviewed reports, marked patterns, and wrote brief notes in the margins. His handwriting was neat and small. There was no drama in it. He thought about the enemy shooters, not with anger, but with understanding. He had once stood where they stood, learning angles, wind, patience. He had taught others those same skills. Some learned well. Some learned just enough to be dangerous. He closed the notebook and leaned back. In the days that followed, stories began to circulate quietly within the unit. Not exaggerated ones. Just observations. How the intelligence officer seemed to know where danger would come from. How he could read a place before anyone else felt uneasy. No one spread his past openly. There was respect in the silence. Command eventually sent word of appreciation. It was brief and formal. The officer acknowledged it with a nod and moved on. Recognition had never been the point. Weeks later, the unit rotated out. New faces arrived. New roles shifted. The officer prepared to move on as well, reassigned to another task that required listening more than speaking. On his last day with the unit, someone asked if they would meet again. The officer said maybe. Paths crossed in strange ways. As he packed his gear, he left behind nothing personal. No photos, no notes. Just an impression. The soldiers he left behind carried that impression forward. In later moments of stress, they remembered his voice, his timing, his patience. Some adjusted their movements because of it. Some slowed their breathing without knowing it. They carried a piece of his teaching. Far away, the story of that day faded from memory for most. It became just another entry in a long record of operations. No headline captured it. No image showed it. But for those who had been there, it remained clear. They had seen what happened when assumptions failed. When someone judged by role instead of skill. When the quiet presence turned out to be the strongest one. The enemy had believed they were. Facing only an intelligence officer, they had been wrong. What they encountered instead was someone who understood the craft, deeply enough to step back from it. Someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Someone who had spent years shaping others to survive the very moment they tried to create. The officer continued on. unseen by most, carrying knowledge earned through patience and responsibility. And somewhere down the line, when another group faced uncertainty and pressure, that same quiet presence would likely be there again, observing, guiding, and correcting mistakes before they became losses, because the most dangerous lessons are rarely taught loudly. They are taught calmly, by those who already know the cost.